kind of a show are you guys putting on here today? I mean, the only class in this act is sitting next to me.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for yet another episode of LeetSpeak, where we discuss all things cybersecurity, cloud, and the Internet of Everything. I'm your host, Alissa Knight, and today I'm joined by Nicole Culver, the marketing manager for Strongkey, as well as Strongkey's CTO, Arshad Noor. Strongkey is leading the effort in eliminating passwords in web applications by enabling companies to quickly and easily integrate their web applications with PKI that encrypts all data in transit and at rest with the simple, easy-to-use appliance for on-prem and cloud deployments. Today we'll be nerding out on what PKI is, hardware security modules, trusted platform modules, public key cryptography, and discussing the ongoing debate on the death of passwords in the enterprise and what that means to you, the CISO. So sit back, relax, and enjoy another episode of LeetSpeak coming up.
Alissa Knight.
That major hack attack against Sony. First, the studio's movies.
3 days after Target confirmed the hacking of payment information from as many as 40 million customer credit and debit cards.
What sources are telling us is a massive Chinese hack of U.S. government computers.
A massive data breach of the IRS was much bigger than first realized. The agency now says more than 700,000 Social Security information of more than 14 million current and former government employees. This comes after an even
Incoming message. It's Friday, and that means time for another episode of LeetSpeak with Alissa Knight, bridging the gap between all things information security, where we'll talk the latest vulnerabilities, threats, security conferences, malware and exploits, as well as interview CISOs and CIOs from around the world on the IT risk management topics that matter most. Alissa Knight, one woman, one mission, one voice, in the world's foremost authority on hacking the cloud and Internet of Things. Coming to you unplugged and unleashed in this week's new episode of LeetSpeak with Alissa Knight.
Well, good morning, Arshad and Nicole. Thanks for coming out today.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Let's introduce you guys. Nicole, if you can just tell me about yourself and kind of what brought you to Strongkey.
Sure thing. I am a marketing professional. In my past history, worked with some other technology startups. And I was really attracted to Strongkey, both because of the stage. I like having hands-on, wearing a lot of different hats, I guess. And also, I love to learn new things. I knew nothing about data security when I came on. When I spoke with Jake, the CEO, and Arshad, they really brought to light some things that I did not even know about. And it's been a really fun journey learning about it.
Awesome. Do you think that having that subject matter expertise in cybersecurity is necessary to be successful in marketing, or do you think it's really? Do you really feel that if you have an expertise in marketing, it really doesn't matter what it is you're actually marketing?
I guess I take a little bit of a middle road stance there. I believe that once you have the basic marketing skills, you can apply them to any industry, but you really do have to put in the time and effort to learn a significant amount. So you don't have to be a subject matter expert and have done your whole life in, for example, data security, but you need to be able to pay attention and speak the language and know what matters to the audience that you're speaking to.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, my father was the director of marketing for Sun Microsystems, so I grew up in a household with a father who was a marketing genius, and he was great at it. And I love marketing people, so it's really nice to have you on the show. I understand you're actually new to Strongkey, correct?
That's correct. It's been about 4 months.
Awesome. How are they treating you?
I mean,
Arshad, cover your ears right now.
I mean, the sweatshop at least provides water, but they are wonderful, and they've been really patient with the learning process, and that has been the greatest thing. I think the first 3 months I felt not entirely useless, but definitely definitely felt like I had to work very hard to drink from the fire hose, so to speak. And now I feel like I'm starting to understand the language much better.
Do you prefer startups over the big, soulless multi-billion-dollar conglomerates?
Absolutely. I have worked for both. I love the autonomy and the encouragement of failing forward that comes with a startup. You learn more in, they say startup years are like dog years. So I was at the last startup for 3 years. And when I left, the hiring manager who hadn't been there when I came on was like, oh my gosh, that's like spending 7 years at a regular company. So I do feel that you get to learn a lot more and have a lot more hands-on experience, which is my idea of a good time.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, awesome. Welcome to the party. And Arshad, we'll pass it over.
Alissa, I know I'm supposed to be the interviewee, but I do have one very interesting question for Nicole that I hadn't thought of, and perhaps you might be interested in the answer to. Is it all right if I ask her this question?
Please do.
So, Nicole, you've been with us for 4 months now, and you do realize that you have to know the language about data security. Do you believe that the industry is doing a good job in educating the average consumer about data security?
Ooh, good question.
That's an excellent question, Arshad. And actually, I feel from the massive amounts of newsletters that I try to consume and the white papers that I try to read, and no, I don't think that the industry does a very good job of educating the average consumer. In fact, what has been my experience has actually motivated me to establish our content marketing strategy and thought leadership strategy that we're taking around that simple fact of educating and providing information that's digestible, but also like just really important basics. So I feel like when I do get some of this content and I read it, I have to spend hours down a Google rabbit hole trying to figure out what all this other stuff is that they're referring to. And it seems like they use a lot of industry jargon just for the sake of using industry jargon, when it's really all about a basic subject, and they don't say that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very fair. So Nicole, actually, Arshad, you bring up a good point here, Nicole. So I've always wanted to ask this: do you feel that the dark reading the news, the almost daily stories of compromise, data breaches, that's doing a lot of marketing for you to potential buyers, where there's kind of this symbiotic relationship, if you will, between the black hat community and the defenders of really just marketing the importance of cybersecurity and a lot of that market education and just educating companies on the importance of this proper cyber hygiene and the like is really a lot of that is done by the hackers themselves, where they're doing a portion of your job.
I'm going to take an interesting opinion on this one, and that is to say, I feel like all of the noise about all of the breaches and basically all the marketing that goes on with the companies in this industry, putting forward the fear tactics of like, these breaches are happening all the time, definitely get on board with this protection. I don't think that that's helpful. It feels like you actually lose what's important in all of that noise. I think that although the hackers and the breaches are happening so regularly and people are hearing about it, it's a topic of conversation, which is great. On the one hand, we want to take advantage of that. But on the other hand, I think understanding why it's happening is the most critical piece. And no one's talking about that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think there's a lot of selling fear in this industry where, the sky is falling. It seems to be very systemic. And I've never liked that approach to marketing, sales and marketing. It just, I think it's so much more than that. You can achieve the same outcome without selling that fear. I think it's pretty prevalent, especially at conferences, security conferences.
I agree.
So, Arshad, Tell us about yourself.
Well, why did I come to Strongkey? Well, let me start a little bit about myself. I'm interestingly, a geologist by education, Alissa. I don't know if you know that.
No,
yes, I am.
The most interesting thing I think I've ever heard was a botanist. I had met a cybersecurity engineer who had majored in botany, but this is a new one. So,
well, there you go. Geology, and then I discovered computers by sheer accident, fell in love with it, wanted to switch careers in India and couldn't do that. This was long before the IT outsourcing business had started in India. Came to the United States to start over and learn computers. Couldn't get into computers because I didn't have an engineering or a math background. Wound up doing an MBA in MIS. In case you're not familiar with MIS, that's what they used to call IT back in the 80s, Management Information Systems.
Definitely.
And the education was all about training to become a project manager, to learn how to manage large IT projects, but I was far more fascinated with the technology and pretty much just dove right into the goriest technical details. I do admit I don't know as much as most computer science graduates might, but I haven't let that stop me. I've been fascinated with all things technical, but once I discovered public key cryptography, I don't think anything fascinated me more for lots of reasons, and I can talk about that. But ever since I discovered public key cryptography, I decided that is what I want to do, and that's what I've been doing for nearly 2 decades now.
So you are the Indian Bruce Schneier.
Well, I wouldn't. No, I would not put myself in the same league as Bruce. He's not just a brilliant writer, but he's a true cryptographer. He comes up with cryptographic algorithms. I can only use libraries that somebody has written that implement cryptographic algorithms created by far more brilliant people.
That's still needed.
It is. And the uniqueness, I think, in what I bring to the table is taking very complex technology. I don't know if there are things more complex than cryptography. Maybe there are, but I'm quite satisfied working in that particular field. But what I tend to do is I can marry them to business problems and solve the business problem using the tech. Tech is interesting to people as a hobby. I get that because to me, computers started as a hobby. But when a business problem comes up and you can come up with an optimal solution to the business problem, I think there is a greater satisfaction because you've actually contributed something that helps somebody else become more productive, more economical, or more efficient in their business process. And that's very rewarding, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of us, especially as cybersecurity engineers, have a tendency to focus too much on the exploit, the bash shell, the Metasploit interpreter prompt, and forget that it's not really just about locking things down for the sake of making yourself impenetrable. It's really about enabling the business, and that's really what cybersecurity is. And I think there's an ongoing effort to, I think, educate, and should be an ongoing effort to educate our community of security practitioners that we're not there to just simply do the job of throwing money at the problem and implementing the latest buzzwords or the latest exciting cybersecurity tech. It's really just what can we do to make to implement cybersecurity controls that will lower the risk to the business. That it's not about eliminating risk because that will never happen, but enabling the business to run in a risk managed way.
I would agree. I think human nature is that we all love a mystery. I mean, that's the reason why we have so many crime shows and detective novels, right? I remember once reading a factoid that Agatha Christie actually has more books published and translated than the Bible.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, I read this somewhere. I don't know if it's true or not, but I know we all love mysteries. And then when you think about it, a breach is a mystery until you figure out exactly how it happened. And I get that many cybersecurity experts are more interested in wanting to find out how did that breach actually happen. And they want to break it down. They want to trace every little part of it all the way until they get to the point where, aha, this is exactly how it happened. I realize that can be fascinating. But what I think the industry misses is taking that analysis further and saying, okay, what is the root cause of why this succeeded? And if we can get to that root cause, we know how to prevent it from happening in future.
Fishbone diagram, cause and effect. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because, there have been many conversations that I've had where, I equate incident response and forensics to, crime scene investigation. I was always very addicted to CSI Miami. It's like, okay, what weapon was used? Okay, what exploit was used? Why was this person killed? Why were they murdered? Okay, why did they break into the system? What did they take while they were there? It's very much crime scene investigation. It's getting to the root cause and, or fully understanding and decomposing, why this happened, what was done while they were there. And you need as many detective controls as preventive controls to detect, okay, what was done while there and, what was touched, what was taken, what was modified in many cases as well. But yeah, you bring a good point. It's not just trying to figure out, the answer to those questions, but also what was the initial root cause of it in the first place.
And that's what actually motivates me to do what I do, to be honest with you. Yes, I am interested in learning how exactly a breach happened, but I'm more interested in understanding what was the root cause and how do we prevent this from ever happening again. And time again, I've realized the root cause analysis leads you to very, very, very simple solutions.
Humans?
Well, humans are always going to make mistakes. I don't disagree there. But we have the technology, we have the ability to prevent these problems from happening. Where I think we miss is what Nicole already identified. We inundate the market and the industry with data breaches. Oh my God, look at this fire, look at that fire, look at this building coming down. But we don't focus on the root cause, and journalists, magazines, television, the press, they don't focus in on if they had used strong authentication, this password breach would never have happened.
So do you think
if Yahoo had used FIDO, for example, these 3 billion records would not have been exposed.
So do you think a lot of the more recent breaches, I'd say like within the last decade, a lot of it really can be traced back in a root cause analysis to a breakdown in authentication controls or authentication mechanisms, and our over reliance on passwords and I know we're going to talk about that during the show about whether or not passwords are dead or should be dead as a form of single factor authentication. But do you think that's really the root cause of a lot of the largest breaches over the last decade is authentication?
For the vast majority, I completely agree. I mean, I'm a programmer and I love Unix. And one of the reasons why I love Unix is because it is so efficient. There are commands with 2 characters in it, right? CD,
right.
MV, RM. But why is it that we love commands that are so short? Is it because it makes us more intelligent because we understand these non-English commands? No, it's because we're lazy. We want things to work quickly. We want things to move faster. I mean, I'm not that different from Unix aficionados who have even aliased 2-character commands to a single character.
I've seen that
before. Believe it or not, yes.
I've seen that before, too.
Hackers are lazier.
Yeah.
I mean, the attackers are lazier. They want the money. They want the dopamine rush of having compromised a system, but they don't want to necessarily work very hard at it. And the easier it is, the better it is. So if there's a way to... Sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, no, sorry. So it's funny that you bring that up because, I mean, definitely, humans are inherently lazy, and I've been in numerous penetration tests where passwords were removed because they got tired of typing it, or, just ridiculous things like, the password was too complex, so they changed it to password, and this was a root account. But, it's laziness. I think a lot of the breaches, in history could probably be attributed to just human laziness.
Well, I'm being a little too hard on human beings. Maybe it's not laziness. Maybe it's boredom. It's just boredom, right? You want exciting new experiences. You want interesting new challenges, but you definitely don't want to be bored with the same old problem. But if the dopamine rush comes from compromising a site, and if a password breach makes it possible, then that's the attack they're going to try first. And now everything is pretty much automated, right?
Right.
You have dictionary attack tools, you have rainbow attack tools, and those things just automatically go at a particular file. If they manage to get a file of passwords, hashed passwords, or whatever it is, they're just going to turn that loose on a dictionary or rainbow attack tool and walk away to go get a cup of coffee or something, and then see how many passwords got breached.
Yeah, no, I agree. I remember, when I first started hacking, this was back in the early 90s, I mean, things were so different back then. If you wanted to, exploit a target service, for example, you actually had to try, so you found the .c, exploit, you had to compile it, hope it compiled, hope you didn't run into any compilation errors or library issues. You actually had to try, and you spend a week finding an exploit, you finally get someone to send it to you on the IRC, and the damn thing won't compile. And you're back to square one, or you hope that you're a programmer and can figure out how to fix it, and then try and get it compiled at that point. But you had to actually GCC -O exploits. Now it's very point and click,
Correct. I mean, now you don't even have to point and click. There is a underground database with more than 1.4 billion passwords in the plain text.
Yeah.
You just have to go and search for somebody's email address, and it'll spit out all of the passwords it knows for that individual.
Yeah, that's pretty scary.
That's how automated it has become. And those kinds of problems were so preventable 20 years ago. Granted, smart cards and public key cryptography, they were complex, but for people who really wanted to eliminate it, they could have eliminated those problems. The funny thing is, Yahoo, one of the largest breaches in the US, right? Turns out Yahoo Japan had implemented FIDO 3 years ago.
Oh, really?
4 years ago, yeah. If you go and trace some of the history of FIDO Alliance, you'll find that Yahoo Japan actually implemented FIDO 4 years ago. And yet in the United States, they were still using passwords.
Wow. Okay. Actually, that's an awesome segue. I'm going to put Nicole back on the spot here. So, Nicole, you want to just talk about, who Strongkey is, who who FIDO is, the distinction between Strongkey and FIDO. Is Strongkey FIDO? What's for our listeners who just don't know? It would be great, I think, for you to go into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are not FIDO for sure. We work with FIDO. We support FIDO. So the FIDO Alliance They are a nonprofit group that was founded a few years ago for improving the whole concept of fast identification online. We say we're lazy, so we want to be able to not have to remember that really complicated password, but also still keep our things secure. So FIDO came together, I believe in 2012, to incorporate some security improvements around the idea of passwords and authentication. And originally, some of their earliest ideas were U2F and UAF, so universal two-factor authentication. And then the universal authentication framework. Essentially, it's a very simple protocol, right? Like you can put in your password and then some other way of making sure that that person putting in the password is you, whether it's a text message or an email, happens to make sure that that's guaranteed. It seems really straightforward, but it was only started a few years ago. And then the UAF was designed specifically for mobile devices, but same idea. And then, skip forward 6 years, and now people are still not necessarily implementing these kinds of protocols. But now FIDO is, working really hard on FIDO2 and WebAuthn and working on biometrics and other forms of authentication instead of just passwords and two-factor. Because I'm reading every day about how, even, I think it was GitLab that got, or GitHub that got breached with their universal two-factor, something like that. So I think we just really want to make sure that something as simple and straightforward as what the FIDO Alliance is putting forward and as user-friendly is being recognized. I mean, not just nationally, but internationally.
Yeah, when I met you guys at the Money 2020 conference recently in Las Vegas, you guys had actually given me a really cool tchotchke, better than a free pen or T-shirt.
That's right.
A fob from NXP. So keep me honest here, Nicole, but I believe there are now actually hardware vendors that are partnering up in the FIDO Alliance, like NXP, who are making these hardware-based authentication devices to that tie in or work with some of the other FIDO Alliance vendors for that multi-factor authentication you're talking about.
Absolutely. Like the one that comes to mind immediately is Yubico. They have their YubiKey, which is a FIDO authentication device. And, we are one of the vendors that works with YubiKey to help encourage FIDO protocols.
So, Nicole, I was just having a conversation with one of my colleagues over at IT about this very thing, about whether or not, our organizations starting to move away from hardware-based fobs, hardware-based devices. Like if you remember those old, RSA one-time code generators that people would walk around with on their keychain. Do you think a lot of organizations are moving away from those just for cost and logistical reasons, where they're now moving to soft mobile apps as an alternative? Or do you think that it's the opposite, that organizations are starting to roll out the YubiKeys of the world or the NXPs of the world as in addition, or is the move more towards mobile?
So this reminds me of, I don't know if you remember, but when I was in high school, this might date me a little bit, but when I was in high school, we used zip disks.
Oh,
they were
God, yeah, zip disks. Yeah, I remember those.
And so the idea that we're trying to, or that the industry is moving away from the hardware-based authentication, I don't know that that's the right way to think about it. I think that in the time it's taken the industry to realize that kind of technology is available to them and how easy it is to implement, new and better technology has started, thanks to the Apples of the world, right, with biometrics and mobile authentication. So I don't think there's necessarily a move away from it. I think that the hardware-based authentication has its place, but in terms of humans being inherently lazy and liking convenience, we also have an authentication device with us at all times. I mean, most people have a smartphone. So.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. So does FIDO and or its alliance partners have mobile apps that can be used as an alternative? So if I didn't want to use my NXP key that you guys graciously gave me at the conference, and I wanted to, use like a mobile app instead, is there an app that our listeners can download and use with it?
Yeah, so I believe, and Arshad, you can step in here and correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a mobile app that can be integrated through the FIDO UAS protocol, but I'm not sure what the name of the mobile app is off the top of my head.
So actually what's happening, Alissa, is that Google is embedding FIDO protocol directly into the Android operating system.
Oh,
and
wow.
They're exposing an API. So there isn't likely going to be a separate app that just does FIDO, but now any mobile app developer can take advantage of the API that Google is exposing and build FIDO right into their app. So
that's really interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah, I would assume that it would probably be an alliance partner that would develop something. And you're not
doesn't have to.
Yeah,
they don't have to. We did this about 2 years ago because what was happening 3 years ago was U2F and UAF were using external authenticators, as they are now known. Right? Separate devices, the YubiKey devices, the NXP devices, and UAF was using mobile phones as authenticators. But what we did was, just as an experiment, because from a protocol point of view, even though we built a library that implemented U2F on Android operating system and we released it into the open source community, we put out a little notice saying that this is just experimental because the way the U2F protocol works and the way we were forced to implement it, it's impossible for it to be secure.
Can you just explain to our listeners what U2F and UAF is? Is it something from FIDO? Is it FIDO? What can you explain?
Right. So FIDO Alliance only specifies protocols. That's what they do. They standardize protocols. They don't make implementations. And anyone that believes that they have an opportunity to build a product around a protocol, they can go for it. It's royalty free. They don't have to pay anyone any licensing fee. So what that has done is it has attracted more than 200 companies worldwide, and they're building different components for the FIDO ecosystem. So NXP, for example, they build actually chips with firmware that implement the FIDO protocol. Companies like Yubico, they buy those chips and they may use the firmware or they may overwrite it and use their own firmware, but then they add some additional value and all of the marketing that goes around making it easy and attractive for consumers to use YubiKeys, and they put it out into the marketplace. Strongkey, we decided to stay away from the authenticator space, focus on only the server, because I've been around long enough to realize that the authenticator market is going to get extremely crowded, and recognizing where this is going, I know that the mobile phone is going to become the primary authenticator for most people.
I agree.
Another form factor is going to be your credit card or your bank card, because in the FIDO Alliance, all of the card issuers are board members, as are some of the largest banks in the world. So implementing FIDO capability in a smart chip, it's not a big deal. So I anticipate that the phone, the smart card in your wallet, and perhaps your keychain, whether that keychain is for a automobile, a motorbike, or maybe your house keys, they can all be FIDO authenticators. So recognizing that, realize there's no sense in spending time building authenticators and competing in that space, but we'll build one of the most efficient, most scalable, and most robust robust open source FIDO server.
Okay,
And
so
that's what we did.
So that's So I think that's an awesome segue into who is Strongkey. Do you or Nicole want to take that one? If you can just kind of introduce our listeners to who Strongkey is, what problem you guys are trying to solve.
You don't mind, Nicole, if I take that?
Go for it.
Oh, okay. So the problem that I saw after doing root cause analysis, where there were three fundamental problems around protecting data. If you think about computers, what are they used for? Processing data and storing data. Why? Because it makes humans far more efficient. But if you're trying to protect that data, you have to worry about three different things. Is the source of that data authentic? Is it coming from the right source? Second, if that information needs to be protected, is it being protected for confidentiality reasons? And finally, if you're storing the data over a period of time, and you need to make business decisions on it more than once over that period of time, can you depend on the integrity of the data that you've saved? Interestingly enough, public key cryptography is the only technology I know that can address all three data protection problems with a single technology. Nothing else can do that. With public key cryptography, you have the ability to get digital signatures right from the source that generated the data, and that digital signature verifies the authenticity of that information that's coming into your system. With encryption, you can now protect that information for as long as the algorithm holds. And you can preserve that information's integrity through digital signatures that are generated by your application. And now you verify the digital signature each time you read it back, and it tells you instantly whether the integrity is intact or not.
So it addresses the CI and CIA triad. So
Actually, believe it or not, I am old enough to remember that CIA actually came out of the crypto world, not from the security world.
Really?
And the C and the A actually represented authenticity.
Really?
Somewhere along the way, somebody hijacked it and made it availability. And since then, I just go blue in the face telling people, guys, it came out of crypto. It was supposed to be confidentiality, integrity, and authenticity.
No, I had no idea. Oh my God. As a matter of fact, I thought IC squared was the, I thought that was a brainchild of the IC squared for the CISSP common body of knowledge. So it actually came from cryptography.
RSA conference 20 years ago actually used to have less than 20, 25 cryptographers gathering in a room to talk about crypto.
I had no idea.
And that's where CIA actually came out. And believe it or not, that's how I recognize, oh my gosh, this tech is so powerful that it can deliver all three of these capabilities in a single technology. But now I don't worry so much about the marketing thing. People want to call it confidentiality, integrity, availability. That's fine with them. I've decided it's easier for us to rebrand it as ACT, authenticity, confidentiality, and transaction integrity.
Oh, that's a good one.
So now from a business point of view, so CIA was more a technical person's interpretation of crypto. ACT is a business person's interpretation of risk management.
Okay.
That's what we prefer to do. We leverage public key crypto to solve the business problems that businesses worldwide are facing.
And how do you do that? I believe you guys have a flagship product for the enterprise called the Key Appliance.
That is correct. So we built the Key Appliance out of technology that was created more than a decade ago, which was cryptographic key management. Now, the key management is the underlying foundation for all of the capabilities that our Key Appliance delivers. Using hardware-based cryptographic modules, we generate, protect, and store cryptographic keys hundreds of millions of keys if necessary. And we then deliver web services that can encrypt, tokenize, provide strong authentication in capabilities like PKI, FIDO, and digital signatures for transactions.
So it's so basically the key appliance is an HSM on steroids. So would you consider the key appliance to be a hardware security module?
Actually, we leverage hardware security modules where customers are willing to pay for the optional price that the HSM costs, but we deliver far more than an HSM. HSMs were designed to protect and generate cryptographic keys. But if you wanted to deliver business services, business application services that where cryptography was involved, you had to design that into your application. Additionally, the life cycle of cryptographic keys, it was not automatically available in hardware security modules. You had to build that life cycle management in your application, and that is exactly what the militaries, the NSA, the large banks, they've been doing it for decades. They buy the hardware cryptographic modules, the HSMs, and then they've invested years, hundreds of man years in building all of these applications and lifecycle key lifecycle management in their business applications. What we have done, so I personally started working with PKI back in 1999 at Sun Microsystems, and having delivered that, realized, oh my gosh, this is the most exciting technology I've ever come across. Came to Strongkey, and with the hopes of building faster, cheaper, better PKIs and strong authentication.
So you guys have effectively merged. You guys have effectively merged both worlds, the HSM and these web services for web apps, into a single solution. So companies.
That is correct. That is correct.
Yeah, Arshad.
Sorry, Nicole, go for it.
I was going to jump in here and just say that our products, which technically we have the Talaro, which is what used to be called the key appliance. Now we have separated that into the Talaro E series, which can be an HSM if you want that, or the T series, which is a smaller, I think, data output processor, but has all the same capabilities. And inside these hardware devices, we've packaged all of the software and web services that you would need to completely secure your business, no matter what business solution you're solving for. So it's very scalable.
That's interesting. Yeah. So let's give our listeners a case study example here. So for customers that have, for example, a web app that's transacting, credit card numbers or PII or whatever it may be, let's just call it credit card numbers. And I do believe you guys actually support file uploads as well, or actual, the encryption and encryption at rest of files. But let's say the web app is transacting credit card numbers. Your solution effectively gives them a plug and play, for lack of a better word, of an HSM and secure web services server that they simply just plug a few lines of code into their web app and they're immediately up and running for secure key generation, management, storage, and security of those credit card numbers. And the actual credit card database would actually live on your appliance.
Yeah, so essentially what we've done is we've taken all of the cryptographic plumbing, as I call it, details, and put them inside the appliance. And now the web application developer, all they have to do is just call an encrypt web service, send in the 16-digit credit card number, and in less than a second, what they get back is a token. They store their token in their application database, and they're done. The advantage here from a business point of view and a compliance point of view is, number one, they don't have the cryptographic keys in their web application. Number two, they're not performing the cryptography in their web application. Number three, they do not have the encrypted data in their web application database. Now, from a PCI compliance point of view, it essentially takes their web application completely out of scope for encryption and key management of the DSS audit.
Okay, so if they're a PCI shop, this is a cardholder data environment, they can actually remove that web server, that web app server from the scope of their PCI compliance.
For encryption and key management, we have to be very specific here because DSS has more than 150 controls.
Right.
Encryption and key management only focus on 12 of them, but they are the hardest 12 to address.
Interesting. And Nicole, you mentioned the different product lines. So there is a lot more than just the key appliance that you guys have brought to market. There's also the Talaro, the DP appliance, the PKI appliance. What can you help our listeners understand what the difference is between these products? So if you're an enterprise customer, is the Talaro not an appropriate fit? Should they be looking at the key appliance? What's the difference between the Talaro and the key appliance?
So there actually is no difference. It's actually, we rebranded last year. We used to be Strong Auth Inc., and now we're Strongkey. And in that rebrand, we decided to simplify our product lines to have them make a little bit more sense. So the key appliance is essentially the Talaro, whether you're talking about the E series or the T series. It is the basis of our cryptographic hardware that does the key management and cryptography underneath all of the other layers that we are capable of doing. And then the Talaro E series, we recommend for large enterprises. That's why it's called E, because it has, I think, almost 1,000 transactions per second rate for each machine. Whereas the Talaro T series, which we call T because it's tiny, it's not that huge, block that you have to host in a server room. It can sit on your desktop. That one, I think, has about 100 or so transactions per second per unit. But essentially, the same machines do exactly the same thing, and they both have the capability to do everything. The only difference for the enterprise is that you can turn that into an HSM by getting the hardware, the optional hardware added to that.
Okay, so basically, it's the same secret sauce. It's the same code that you guys have developed, the same IP, just in different form factors. It can pretty much do all the same things, except that Key Appliance has the capability for a customer to go ahead and add on that additional HSM chip.
That's
the
correct.
enterprise. So now we're calling it the Talaro Enterprise. So both of the appliances actually come with a FIP certified cryptographic hardware module as a standard feature, Alissa.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if you are familiar with the Trusted Platform Module, TPM.
Yes, TPMs, yep.
So we've been shipping all our appliances with TPMs for nearly a decade. Why do we do that? Because I've learned that you cannot do cryptography, you cannot do cryptographic key management without hardware. Why is FIDO, for example, mandating that hardware should be a requirement for strong authentication? Because they've learned you can't protect secret private keys in software. That's exactly what breaks down the security and the structure and dependability of the internet. So the expensive banks and militaries, they recognized this problem more than 4 decades ago, to be honest. And they created HSMs to just focus on cryptographic key storage, generation, and management. We decided when we start selling an appliance, we're not going to do key management without hardware. We looked at the market. The market had HSMs and it had TPMs. What is the difference? Think of the HSM as a bus. The bus has the ability to have many dozens of people that it can carry at the same time. It can carry a whole lot more load. The TPM is more like a small car. It has the ability to store exactly one public-private key pair, but because of the way the Trusted Computing Group, another nonprofit standards group who designed the TPM, the way they designed it, it can manage a hierarchy of billions of cryptographic keys very securely. We invested in writing our code to the TPM, which is not an easy process, I will admit. And we made that a standard component of all our appliances, far exceeding even what PCI DSS and HIPAA ask for. Even today, the PCI DSS does not require cryptographic hardware for key management.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I actually, as you know, I'm in the process of publishing a book on hacking connected cars, and I'm actually writing a chapter right now on TPMs. And it's funny you bring up the Trusted Computing Group. They actually just released a paper on the application of TPMs in a small form factor for connected automobiles, and using that for the storage, the secure storage of in PKI infrastructure.
We've been doing it for a decade on the enterprise class appliances, and now with the T, the Telaro T, it is a standard component, a FIPS certified level 2 TPM.
Wow.
Now, the HSM is optional in the enterprise appliance. Now, why did we make that optional? Because in the United States, federal law mandates that anyone selling to the federal government, you had to sell only FIPS certified cryptographic modules. Yeah. So some of our customers, they were providing payment processing service or data protection services to the government, and as a result, they had to show that they were using FIPS certified hardware or software. And at that time, the version of TPM that existed in the market was TPM version 1.2. But for technical reasons, because of its design, it could not be FIPS certified. So in those situations, the HSM solved that particular problem. But now the Trusted Computing Group has come out with TPM 2.0, and the new design actually allows it to be FIPS certified, and they are FIPS certified at level 2. So technically, the HSM market is, it's not going to disappear, but I see demand for HSM drifting downward.
Interesting. Yeah. So, and it's as Nicole mentioned, it's, the Telaro, the Keyplans, they all do the kind of same things. One of the things that you guys have talked about in the past is, the elimination of passwords. And we brought this up briefly so far about how, the form of single factor authentication with passwords is dead or will soon be dead. How long do you think it will take? And you guys also mentioned your products eliminate passwords and single sign-on to web applications. So how do you guys do that? And what's your personal opinion about how long before we actually see the enterprise just completely moving away from relying on passwords?
So let me answer the second question first. I don't think passwords will ever disappear, just like mainframes and mini computers have not disappeared from computing yet. Okay. But what you are going to see is that cost is going to define what technology an enterprise uses for authentication. And they are going to start seeing a wave where passwords are eliminated and FIDO starts becoming more and more common for web applications. As that tsunami slowly starts rolling out, then they're going to recognize that anyone who's left with a web application that's using passwords, they become the low-hanging fruit for the attackers. And they're going to be forced to go to FIDO because they can't afford to be still stuck with passwords and secure ID, OTPs, and knowledge-based authentication, or any of these shared secret mechanisms, because that becomes a vulnerability, a glaring vulnerability. You've got this problem, of course, where if you have a SaaS platform, or you have, let's say, for example, even an online bank, where you sign up for an account, consumers want immediate access to that account. They specify their username and password when they're registering for their new account.
Do you see eventually, the more sensitive SaaS platforms like maybe even your Salesforces of the world, or, your Bank of Americas of the world, or Wells Fargo's of the world, saying, hey, look, you can register for an account, but we've integrated with FIDO, and you need to wait until we send you your token, your hardware device in the mail before you can actually log in and access your account. Do you see that happening eventually, or is that happening now?
Do you know that Salesforce has actually supported FIDO U2F for the last 3 years?
Oh, I did not know that.
That's the problem with the big boys out there. Google, Facebook, GitHub, Salesforce.com, Bank of America, they have all supported FIDO for the last 3 years.
But the problem
they
is
don't tell their consumers.
Exactly. And I don't even know where I would go on the Bank of America website to turn on or enable that FIDO authentication so I can use, for example, the NXP key you guys gave me. So, is that the breakdown? Do you think that, yes, these big companies have actually done it, but the problem is that during account sign up or whatever it may be, they just aren't requiring that form of authentication to access your account?
I think there's some fallacy in the industry, Alissa, that human beings can't cope with complexity. That's what I've noticed in the FIDO Alliance. Many of the technical discussions I unfortunately hear are, it has to be easier, and it has to be so easy that people shouldn't even know that FIDO is being used. And the danger FIDO Alliance is going to run into is that consumers are not going to know if FIDO is being used.
God forbid they can't write their passwords down on sticky notes anymore.
So even though all these companies have implemented FIDO, and yes, you can find it, but the problem is you have to go to their specific websites and you have to search on keywords like U2F or security key or authenticator or something, and then hopefully their help pages will show up and it will walk you through how to register your key that I gave you with Salesforce, with GitHub, with Google, with Facebook. And there are many other websites also, actually, that already support FIDO. The reason I think they're not educating their consumers or mandating or even providing a little FIDO logo on their sign-up page is because they anticipate that users are going to find difficulties with the process and they may abandon using that site, much as people abandon their shopping carts if they run into some stumbling block.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. Do you think, and that was going to be my next question is what has inherently been historically the breakdown in PKI and why it hasn't really seen as much widespread adoption? I mean, because PKI has been around for a long time. This isn't a
25 years. 25 years at least.
Yeah, this isn't a 2018 thing. I mean, it's just, it hasn't enjoyed the widespread adoption that I think public key encryption should have. And do you think it's because just it's complex? I mean, you, for example, when you SSH into you stand up a web server, you enable the SSH daemon. By default, it uses, it's configured for password authentication. You have to go through this process of, adding to the known keys file in your home directory in Linux or Unix, and, set up your SSH client, find a how-to on how to do that with your SSH client. Is it complexity? It's just, it's easier to just, do a password, versus.
That is exactly what it is. PKI has been complex and it is increasingly getting more and more complex, but that's because it was designed to deal with problems from the 70s and the 80s. And as a result, in the United States, while PKI is very heavily used in the federal government, so for example, all of the personal identity and verification cards that every federal employee is issued, it is a smart card with 2 digital certificates on it. Every identification card issued by the Department of Defense, what they call the Common Access card, it is a smart card with 2 digital certificates on it, one for authentication and the other for encryption. However, even though the federal government spent over $1 billion building and maintaining their PKI, writing applications to leverage PKI and eliminate password, it's not easy. We've done it. We've built applications 10, 12 years ago that use smart cards and digital certificates and eliminated the use of passwords in web applications. But it's not that simple. It takes quite a lot of effort to understand the moving parts, the mechanics, and depending on what particular application server, what libraries you're using, it can take you many weeks to maybe even months to actually get this working right. And then Microsoft or Mozilla go and change something in their browser and it breaks. And then you're back to square one. So these kinds of problems, and PKI by itself independently was becoming more and more complex with extensions. As a result, even though countries, enterprises, militaries, they've invested in PKI and in smart cards, it has not been cheap. It hasn't been easy. FIDO was designed to solve that problem. They used public key cryptography, the same crypto that's in smart cards and digital certificates in PKI, but without the digital certificates in PKI. They leverage browser technology, the web architecture. They eliminate some of the attacks that are very common in web applications, things like phishing, man-in-the-middle attacks, and making sure that every key pair that you generate on the FIDO authenticator is tied to a specific web origin. So you're not reusing the same credential across dozens of websites, but you've actually got dozens of cryptographic keys for those dozens of websites. Each website only sees its own key pair and nobody else's. So FIDO has addressed so many of the complexity problems that PKI was boggled with, and they are trying to make it so easy and simple that it's integrated with your Windows operating system, with your Android operating system, integrated with all of the browsers because of the W3C standard. And the hope is that this becomes ubiquitous.
Yeah, not to oversimplify your answer, Arshad, but I would like to offer up a simple example in the sense of from a marketing perspective. You know, we're asking the world to create mass behavior change, which isn't easy to do. If you think about it from the user experience perspective, one of the things people in marketing consider is, will adding an extra field in a form discourage someone from submitting the form because it's too much? It's an extra 3.5 seconds and it's too much. And so asking people to change their behavior, even just to learn a new system, you know, passwords have been around, as Arshad always says, for over 50 years. People know it. It's comfortable. So I think that is the major problem. And I think the only way we're going to start seeing that behavior change is if those major industries like the Googles and the Facebooks and the Salesforces, if they start requiring it for their services.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So you guys are an awesome solution to this, and you guys are built on. I think it's accurate to say you guys are built on FIDO. So this is this is an option for enterprise organizations that are wanting to quickly get up and running with PKI with their web applications. What are some of the questions that customers should ask, buyers should ask when considering the adoption of a solution like this, when they're looking at different vendors, when they're looking at different options? What are those questions that buyers should be asking when evaluating solutions?
Certainly, how easy is it to use the interfaces to those devices? Okay. Is it highly available? Because nobody wants their business going down. How deep is the protection? Because there are solutions out there. For example, there are many new companies that have come up just in the last 5-6 years that offer encryption and tokenization as a service on the internet. And they talk about how secure they are, but they don't provide any details. They don't mention whether there's any cryptographic hardware behind them, who is responsible for ownership and management of that key management infrastructure, who has access to those cryptographic keys. So when you don't specify those types of things, you leave buyers in the dark. And buyers have a responsibility because they are because they're custodians of sensitive data. And now with regulations like GDPR and the California Consumer Privacy Act that became law or will become law in 2020, businesses now have a responsibility to prove that they are doing the right things to protect sensitive data that belong to consumers. And if they don't know the controls that are in place that protect that data, and if they don't understand who is responsible for managing those controls, then they wouldn't have done their due diligence. And heaven forbid that this goes into a court of law, there is a lawsuit, it will show up that the enterprise or the consumer, the buyer of the technology, didn't ask the right questions. So buyers have to ask probing questions about who is responsible for the key management, how are those controls implemented, how are those controls managed, who is managing that, and what are the mechanisms by which a system like that can get breached. Because Alissa, nothing is infallible. Everything can be broken, right?
Right.
And if you don't ask the question, how does this system get broken, you don't understand how it will get broken.
Right. Yeah. And it's we bring up, and what we're really talking about here also is the most, I think one of the more important questions to ask is that, friction versus frictionless solutions where on integration, organizations this is an investment, making sure that integration process with their existing infrastructure, their existing web apps is as frictionless as possible. And I'm assuming that's something also that Strongkey has taken into consideration as it's developed its product. I think the last estimate I heard from you on integration time was pretty much less than 60 seconds on taking that.
No, 60 minutes.
Sorry, 60 minutes. Thank you for keeping me honest there. Yeah, less than an hour and taking that snippet of code and integrating it into their existing web app. And that integration time is important.
But completeness of solution is also important for businesses, Alissa. People don't want to buy half a dozen different solutions to solve their risk problems, right?
Right.
And if there is a solution provider that has packaged all of the capabilities that you need to protect your customer data, comply with regulations, and manage it all in one place, then I think it offers the best of all options.
So with that being said, this may be a Nicole question, but Nicole, how do you guys, how's your business model structured? How do you guys price out your solution? How much should an organization plan to budget for implementing something like this into their existing web apps?
Well, this might be something that Arshad will have to add to, but what I can say is that from what I know of the industry, most people's pricing model is, per seat or per license. We basically charge for the appliance, and then we charge a fee for the ongoing service support registration that you get, which that's pretty standard in the industry, but we don't charge per seat. So once you've bought that appliance, you can have, that's it. You don't have to add licenses to it because it's all open source. So we basically view it as security should be not necessarily, I don't want to say the word affordable, but it should be accessible. And, affordability sometimes leads people to think that it's cheap, but it's not. It's just, it is such a difficult and complex option And the way other companies have structured their hardware in the past, the licensing just adds up. So that, the machine costs this much, and then a license costs this much, and then you need 20 of them. So Strongkey really wanted to make sure that protection like this, that data protection, whether it's encrypting and tokenizing payment information or even sending sensitive information to clients, that can be done on every level. So not just the Googles and the Facebooks of the world can afford it, but the local law office or the tax revenue service, the little individual tax offices that are filing every year for hundreds of millions of people, So I think that our pricing structure, while I can't just pull numbers off the top of my head, but I can say that we try to make it more accessible to the world.
Definitely.
I can add to that and give you just an idea of where we're moving, Alissa. So it all depends on the use cases. So if you were, let's just say, a small to medium-sized payment processor or merchant, e-commerce merchant, and if you were just looking for PCI DSS compliance and you needed to protect cardholder data, then an average estimate of your initial cost used to be on average of $50,000 to $60,000 with recurring support around $10,000-$12,000 each year. But that said, we are moving towards a model where it's going to be more subscription-based and not CapEx-based, where you don't necessarily have to buy the appliance if you with the full capital expenditure, but there are ways where the hardware can be at cost where the subscription is more predictable over the years at a more manageable number. Now, of course, on the other extreme, large enterprises, so we have one customer division of a large e-commerce company encrypting more than 50 million documents and a mortgage bank encrypting 25 million documents. They need a much larger and more complex infrastructure. So there you see average deployment prices ranging from $150,000 to $200,000.
Right. It depends on the architecture. It depends on what it is. And every organization is unique, of course. It is. Sorry. Go ahead, Nicole.
I was going to say something important to point out, though, that I think I really appreciated about our product that Arshad pointed out when I first came on, is that in comparison to other hardware, where you have to basically you buy the engine of the car, and then you need a team of people to build the car around the engine. I really like that analogy because I am not, obviously, was not raised in the crypto world, but our machine is the engine, the car, and then all the capabilities of that car. So all the things you might want. Let's say someday you decide you want a sunroof. The machine that we send out already has the capability built in. It just might not have it activated. So if you want to start with just data protection, but then you want a FIDO server later on, you already have the tools.
It's modular.
Yes.
Right.
That's exactly where it is. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, and I should make sure to point out to our listeners that you guys actually do support hybrid cloud deployments as well. So for our listeners who have hybrid clouds, both a mixture of public, private, on-prem, that this is a great solution for those situations where they may have EC2 instances in the AWS cloud or have virtual servers over in Azure. That this is a great solution for securing even that. It doesn't have to be all on-prem.
That is correct. In fact, that is one of the larger enterprise architectures that we use, that we call a data protection architecture for scalable encryption, decryption of millions and millions of documents.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, you guys are doing some really exciting things over there. I really appreciate your guys' time today and coming on the show. If our listeners want to get more information on Strongkey and take a look at your product, where should they go?
Strongkey.com.
Over to you, Nicole. Sorry.
They can go to strongkey.com or they can email us directly at info@strongkey.com.
Awesome. Well, Nicole, Arshad, I know you're both very busy. Thank you again for coming on as guests of the show. And is there anything either of you want to leave our listeners with before we end?
The only thing I will say in closing, Alissa, is public key cryptography is very powerful. It is complex, but people don't have to be scared of it anymore. We have actually brought it down to earth, and we can make it simple, accessible, as Nicole said, and it can actually really solve business problems.
Wonderful. Well, we're glad you guys are simplifying it for everyone. So you guys, thank you very much again. And it's been a real pleasure having you guys on the show.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Thank you, Alyssa.